Welcome back to the Marianne Hickman Show. Today's podcast is critical. If you are in the podcasting world, whether you're a guest, whether you're a podcast host, maybe you're both and you're doing podcast swaps, I need to introduce you to a friend of mine who wrote this book, How to Make Every Podcast Want You. It's an incredible book. I bought it. I'm reading it myself. But the author, her name is Kimberly Spencer, and she's the guest that I have on this episode today. Now, podcasts, they are a fantastic digital stage where you can grow your audience simultaneously while overlapping with other people's audiences too. She has an incredible formula for what kinds of podcasts you should be on, how to get on those podcasts. Y'all should check her out. This book just became a #1 bestseller. Go grab a copy. I will post a link to this book in the comments below. Check it out. And I want to know, tell me about all the book and everything that you hope it will do and the people that you hope it will serve. And then the people that are listening, I'll go into Kimberly's background in just a second, but I'm just so excited about this book coming out and that we get to talk now, like pre-launch. By the time you hear this, it'll already be launched and you should go check it out, but tell everyone what to expect from this book.
Okay, so this book is called Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Become So Radically Interesting That You'll Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself. And
I love that.
It is how to leverage the power of your story to get booked on podcasts that build your brand awareness and your bottom line for your business. So we're talking storytelling strategy, podcast guesting, and marketing strategy combined into one holistic book. It's everything you need if you want to leverage one of the easiest forms of marketing for your business, which is borrowing other people's audiences and going onto a platform podcast where 66% of people are making $75,000 or above and have a college degree or higher, and 42% of millennials are purchasing based on host recommendations. It's like the market for just going on podcasts is one that is unparalleled to any other social media market, period, bar none.
Oh, a freaking man. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I'll be surprised if you don't know this amazing woman already, but this is Kimberly. She's incredible. When I was a guest on her show, we just like clicked and there was so much brilliance. And I wish we had done this episode sooner, but I'm going to leave it in God's hands and say the timing is perfect. We had some crazy things that happened along the way, but that's for another show. I wanted you to meet Kimberly because of everything that she's doing for speakers who want to appear on podcasts. So Kimberly, like I have this podcast database and it is the shiz. Every time I post about it, I get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments of people that want to download it because it's got 750 shows that all need guests. And the beauty of podcasting is like it's a magazine, it's a newspaper. Everyone that publishes a podcast, if they're doing it right, they interview people, interview style, and they need guests. I've found that solo monologue podcasts, we burn out real fast on those, right? So when podcasts need guests, aspiring speakers or even experienced speakers are like, yes, I will come on your show. You and I use this to meet new people. We use it to find our next business partners and, of course, find our next clients. But I wanted to just dive deep into your expertise on this because I have people that download the podcast database and then do nothing with it. And it breaks my heart. So I wanted to just pick your brain on how to get booked on shows if you're doing it for yourself or if you're hiring an agency, and then how to leverage those shows to grow your brand and to grow your business. This is all within you're an expert in this, right? And you have all the metrics and you have all the numbers and proving why this works. Hey, what's up? Marianne Hickman here. Hey, listen, I hope you enjoyed that episode. We have some pretty amazing speakers on my podcast and, of course, more to come. If this is something that you enjoyed, guys, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. You guys know what to do. I love your comments and I respond to every single one of them personally, not a bot or an agency. So if this is something you're enjoying, tell me about it. Tell me your gold nuggets. I want to hear from you. But here's the most important thing I want you to laser in on. I told you about the podcast database. You've probably seen me post about it all over social media. I want to make sure that you get it. So here's what I want you to do. Go to mariannehickman.com/database. Once you put all of your information in there, I'm going to send you the document. You request access to it. Boom, it's unlocked. Once you're in there, my rule of thumb is to apply to 10 podcasts a month. It's very digestible. It's very easy to do. And the database gets updated twice a week. So I want you constantly checking back in there for the next podcast that fits your audience. Thank you for being here. Much love to you, and we'll see you in the next episode. So talk to the people that downloaded the database and then did nothing.
Okay. So I I'll take you back to 2020 when we were stuck in Australia and we were those Americans who were stuck abroad and everything was dependent upon my online coaching business because my husband's industry completely shut down to bring in income and support our family while living abroad. And I was looking for some form of lead generation that could actually generate revenue and that worked because prior to that live events were our main source of lead generation and I was doing workshops and speaking engagements and that was our main driver and I couldn't do those not only because of covid but because of my visa. And so there we were in Australia and I remembered an interview that had generated a $10,000 coaching contract and I thought, well, what if we just double down on podcast guesting? So my team and I had a small team of 2 VAs at the time and an editor for our podcast that we had. Now, our podcast that we had, the Crown Yourself podcast associated with the Crown Yourself Coaching Company, that podcast was great at turning those pros- prospective buyers, but that were still on the fence. It still needed a little bit of nurturing, a little bit of love into crossing the finish line. But as far as bringing in new business revenue, that wasn't really the driver. But when we started guesting and when I figured out the formula, first and foremost, I realized 90% of podcasts are not worth your time. So the fact that Marianne has this amazing list of active podcasts, like that is absolute gold. Secondly, because 90% of podcasts are not active. So you can go and say, oh, well, here's 6 million podcasts on Apple and I can be on all of them. No, 90% of them aren't producing and 90% stopped after 10 episodes.
Yeah.
Then you have the ones that are active. And when I started looking at what were the ones that were actually generating revenue, speaking engagements, getting clients, it was never me going on a podcast that was about coaching for coaches. It was on me going on podcasts, sharing my story in different areas. And what we crafted was what we call our authority alignment strategy. And with the authority alignment, most podcast agencies and most people think about podcasting and going on other people's shows as I'm a health coach, I'm going to go on other health coaching podcasts. I'm not a health coach, I'm just using that as an example.
Right, right.
I'm a speaker, I'm going to go on speaking podcasts. Now that's great if you want to build relationships within the speaking world because after one person goes on stage, you might not get invited back for another couple years. So there's always that referral based business that is great, but looking at then who is your avatar. And when we started looking and I started getting booked on podcasts for high performers, for high achievers, for productivity, for for uh for leadership, for business, for small business, those were the ones that started to generate revenue. Then I started looking at, well, the other podcasts that were generating revenue were our angle podcasts. So we have our authority, our avatar, and our angle. And the angle is great because the angle is where you get to have a blue ocean, where you look at the specific parts of your story that other people may be targeting the same avatar. They may be in the same industry, but nobody has your story. So let's take, for example, the example of the health coach, right? You're a
Right.
health coach, you're going on health coaching podcasts. That's great. You're building up your authority, but those should only be about 20% of the podcasts that you reach out to. Then you look at who's your ideal client. Well, let's say your ideal client as a health coach is um, mompreneurs who are super stressed, who are back in the workforce after having a baby. Okay, great. That's very specific. So we'd look at mompreneur podcasts, stress, burnout, new baby podcasts, new parenting podcasts, those types of shows would be great for your avatar. But then let's say you're the health coach who battled bulimia. That's a piece of your story that not everybody else has. People may have your authority, they may have your avatar, but nobody has your story. Your story is unique. And so then you can go onto podcasts that are talking about that angle of your story. If it's healed trauma, you're already healed from that journey, and you go on those podcasts, and those bring in a whole new blue ocean of people into your world who may not be the postpartum career mom, but they may want to have that down the road. They may not be exactly your ideal customer avatar, but they're close to it, or they're dealing with a specific problem that is different, and they're trying to listen to podcasts that solve their immediate pain point. And so, looking at those podcasts, those are the ones with your angle that you can then target based on your story.
It's okay. So I wanted to, I love those three. So you said 20% should be your credibility builder, people that are in the same field as you,
Yeah,
right?
so those are
So,
your either your global top 100 podcasts, like the b go aim for the big ones, or your industry specific. So, like, I give the example in the book, if you're a relationship coach, you don't need to be going on Sex with Emily, a global top 100 podcast. You can go on, relationships with Jacqueline or marriage and love, and those types of podcasts, just because they have you, like, featured in the title, by proximity alone, you're established as an expert in relationships and marriage.
right, right. So these other two, and you said the angle, and what was the name of the other category?
Avatar. So your
Avatar.
avatar you wanna focus 50% on, and then your angle you wanna focus about 30% on.
Oh, this is cool. Okay, so I've been actually thinking a lot about this because I've got this database organized by topic, and honestly, I have been a little bit hesitant myself on going on podcasts that are all about single moms. That's a part of my life that I lived in the past. But you're saying that there's the 30% room for, even though that's not my avatar, I should be speaking to that audience because of the angle.
Mhm. Yeah, because 'cause you're gonna have already have built-in know, like, and trust factor, because 'cause you've been through a
Brilliant.
similar lived experience.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. That opens up a whole realm. So I got a question. How do you figure out, you did a lot of work, and I'm sure you have this all automated now, figuring out what podcasts are actually active. And I think this database is pretty well insulated from that because they wouldn't be seeking guests if they weren't an active show. But we don't know what's going to happen to the show down the road, right? I don't know if this show is going to be around. I don't know if, 50 episodes later it's going to be around. And then I
Mhm.
just had a guy on my show who has 160 episodes in and is not monetizing, and my jaw hit the floor. I was like, why did you keep going?" So, well, this must be a huge passion project for you. So, what is it that gives a podcast longevity? And when you're applying to podcasts, what should you be looking for?
So if you're looking to podcast, what can give a podcast longevity is the relationships that you're building with your guests. Like I've had phenomenal mentors become friends because they came on my podcast.
Mm.
And because we got to have an in-depth conversation that suddenly resulted in, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how similar we were, even though you've built a $30 million company. like,
And I
th-
haven't yet,
and I
right?
have yet to do that. Yes.
Right,
And
right.
so being able to say like, that is a position like you very rarely will get to pick someone's brain for an hour and say, hey, I'd love to sit you down for 45 minutes and pick your brain and ask you every question about how you built what you built. But you can do that if you have your own podcast. So podcasting is a great way to attract mentors. It's a great way to attract collaborators. It can be a great way to attract clients, so long as you leverage it as a demonstration of your skill set, not necessarily as a direct one-to-one pitch, because we have a very clear rule at our agency. If any podcast that we submit our clients to direct pitch and like hard pitch our clients after the podcast interview, and I'm not talking like in a follow-up series of emails, like that's really where you should do it. But
Right.
if it's like a hard pitch, like, okay, well, let's schedule a follow-up conversation to discuss future business possibilities. And you're like, that's not why I came on your show. It's happened more than once.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's so skeezy.
it's so skeezy and it makes people feel super uncomfortable. And it's it just is not it's look at the space. A podcast interview, I like to think of it as like a first date.
Yep.
So you get to know each other, you get to build a relationship. Like you and I, like we had an amazing first date on my
Oh my
podcast.
gosh, it was
Like
incredible.
it was awesome. Like we got to
Second date.
bond, second date right here. And that's after like building our relationship. And we were texting each other in between the time that like we recorded mine and then now this recording. And so there's a lot of relationship collateral that happens within that interim time that's building up the know like and trust, because still like you're still a new person in this world to this other person, to the podcast host. So just like you don't go out I hope you don't go out proposing marriage on the first date, but like
Well, in
you
Provo, that's been known to happen.
that
We're in Normanville right here, it has happened.
has
God told me
happened.
that I should marry you. It's pretty gross.
Yeah. So, but ideally, like there's a relationship building, and it doesn't have to take long, but it does have to be built on. an authentic expression and an authentic message and a level of mastery and commitment to the craft. So podcasters, especially for those people who are like 160 episodes in who have not monetized or have not used their own business to monetize their own podcast, which is
Mhm.
bananas. Um, those people, like, they are committed to being amazing podcasters, and they're growing the business side of that skill set and that muscle as well. The thing is that mastery attracts mastery. And so you have to be a master in your field and demonstrate your masterful skill set that you can have that contributes to the other masterful skill set. Maybe that's to their audience, it's to the value that you're going to bring, that's the data, that's the stories that you bring, but you got to bring something to the table.
Oh, yeah. Well, and my mind keeps recycling what you said earlier, and I have a two-part kind of I wanna open up a discussion on this because you said that there was a figure that you mentioned, like $75,000. What was that in relation to, like, how much you should make from your show?
No, no, no. So 75,000, so 66% of podcast listening audience, when polled, are making at least $75,000 or higher per year in annual household income.
Got it,
Compare
okay.
that to LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is around 56%, and that's like the main place to go for B2B business. So you
Right.
have podcast audiences are 66%. And on top of it, you have I cite the full stat in my book as far as like what are the percentages per uh, demographic, baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, but 42% of millennials are now purchasing based on host recommendations. And I had just thought about it in my own personal life and I was like, oh, yeah, I bought Athletic Greens because of Tom Bilyeu's recommendation, and I
Uh-huh.
subscribed to Wealthfront because of Tim Ferriss. And then I was like, oh yeah, I got Butcher Box because of also Tom Bilyeu. And then I was thinking of all the books that I'd read in the past year, and I'm like, 60% of them probably were from podcast interviews that I'd heard and I'd found the person really interesting. So podcast interview, like, and I'm a millennial, I fall into that demographic.
Yeah, I don't like to admit it, but I that demographically, the year matches.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like to consider myself a millennial because I don't like the judgment that comes with it, but whatever. So this the way you make money with podcasts, and you're spot on. I think there's no better way to, as a consumer, trust in a product by to listen to the producer of that product speak for an hour about it,
Yeah.
because you're learning how they feel about it, why they started it, what are the benefits of consuming the product and so forth. What about the people that are starting a podcast in this mindset? We don't like to ever admit that we are money-driven people, and that is weird to me because we all want more money. So, there's this aspect of, yes, I want to make money doing this, but I don't want my customers to think that I'm a money-driven person because that repels them, but I'm also not completely altruistic in doing this for free either. How do you work through that? How do you help your people overcome that?
Well, podcast guesting is a great way to overcome that simply because, like, think about going on a podcast, it's free. So
Yeah,
you're
for
doing
everybody.
yeah, it's free for everyone. You're doing your altruistic duty for those who are not yet able to afford your products or services yet. They can still listen to quality content, especially if you're delivering and focusing of being of service and giving value. You can give free value for the average listener listens up to 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's a small workshop. That's a
Yeah.
small that's more than a TED Talk. Like,
Yeah.
you're able to really deliver quality within those 20 minutes versus 1.27 seconds on a Facebook scroll. So, you're able to build an intimate relationship with somebody who can, maybe by implementing your free content, start to see some traction, generate some income from it, and then say, okay, now now my business is in a space to invest in these services or products. So it serves the altruistic need. And if you're targeting the right podcast, you're also targeting podcasts that you're targeting a market of people who do have a higher income level, of people who are able to purchase.
Yeah.
Um, so you personally, having been an entrepreneur for 17 plus years, I prefer to market to people who have money simply because
Shocker.
I somehow need to make money.
So
So
weird.
so weird. It's so weird. But when you market to broke people, you kind of stay broke.
Yeah.
So, which is why you want to look at who you're marketing to and the medium and the platforms that you're using. And I think I make the case pretty darn clear and make every podcast want to on like why podcast guesting could and maybe should, even though I don't like to should people too much, but like could be one of those avenues that could be really profitable for you. I mean, it
Oh, yeah.
generated over $250,000 in new business revenue for us. So
So here's my question about becoming a guest, because there's this split in the wide world where people are afraid to get on stage and they stay in that fear and they never do it. And then there's the people that are like so excited to get on stage and maybe even a little bit ego driven because they want it to be all about them, and those are pretty repulsive. But there's this spectrum in between
yeah.
of like this middle group that's like, I feel the call to go on stage and I feel like I should. I'm a little bit scared, but I'm going to do it anyway. My concern is that this group of people is at risk for gigantic burnout if they start to appear on shows and they think they're getting what they want, but they don't know how to monetize it and they don't know how to leverage it. I've seen it happen too many times. What do you tell those people?
So I had an example with a relationship coach that came to our agency. And I first of like I didn't know why she came to us because within the first two sentences she was like, "Well, I was on 40 podcasts last month." And I was like, "Wow, that's a
Last
lot of
month.
time." Like last
Yeah.
month. Yeah. And I was like, "Awesome. Great. What was your ROI?" And she was like, "Well, some most of them haven't distributed yet." It was like, "That's fine. A lot of our clients are getting referrals, speaking engagements, clients before the podcast even distributes. So, like, what was your ROI from those 40?" And she was like, "I didn't have any. I didn't know you could." And I was like, my heart broke for her because I'm like, that's 40 hours. Like, for me as a mom, I'm like, that's 40 hours away. That's a whole work week away from my kids. And I didn't see a dime from it that there
Mm.
was like in revenue or reciprocity from the business. No.
Yeah,
So
no
I
thanks.
asked
Hard pass.
so I looked at her and I said, "Well, what was your follow-up strategy?" And she's like, "Well, I figured I'd post about the episode when it distributed." And I was like, "That's not a follow-up strategy."
No.
So what we found was that, even though she was a relationship coach, she was treating the podcast like a one-night stand.
Okay, here we go.
And so she was going on the podcast, she was getting the visibility, getting all the good feels from, the nice little bit of ego boost that comes when you get
Sure.
some validation from your expertise, and people think you're wise and knowing, and you have this advice to give, and you're positioned in this great spot. And she was serving, and she felt like both sides were getting like a lot of good value. And then she never, texted him back. She never messaged them, never dropped him an email, never followed them on social, never did anything, and was expecting, oh, I'll do that when the podcast distributes.
So
Well,
you're talking about the when dropping in, sorry, I don't wanna to, like,
yeah,
interject, but I'm going to because
yeah, totally fine.
okay, so when you say you're not following up with them, you're referencing if the podcast episode hasn't dropped that, then you can't follow up with listeners. There's no way because you don't know who they are.
Yeah,
So you're talking about following up with the producers, or who is
with
this
the
follow-up
host,
sequence you're talking about with?
with the producer, you're building a relationship with the host. The host
Yep.
is the greatest reflection of who their audience is. And
Ooh,
so
well said.
go on podcasts and build that relationship with the host. Now, obviously, not all first dates go into a second date, but if there is rapport, if there is like this amazing experience and you're vibing and you're feeling so great, you don't have to wait to build that relationship. I'm very much of the go giver philosophy. Like, look at how can you be of service to the other person. Nobody likes to be in a relationship with a taker. And a lot of times, unfortunately and unconsciously, most people go on podcast interviews and they are in a bit of a taking energy where they take that visibility spotlight, they got it, and then they ghost the host and don't follow up. And I'm like, there's a bajillion things that you could do in between now and when your podcast distributes. You can send a thank you note. Very simple, but you can send a thank you note to the host. You can ask the host after the podcast, and I'll be asking you, like, is there anything aside from distributing the podcast that I can do to contribute to your success. Do you need like another guest? Do you need a recommendation for like some software? 'Cause I know you're testing out Squadcast and like
Yeah.
like
Yeah, let's go.
so do you want some like so looking for ways to add value that don't necessarily mean that like here are my products and services and I'm going to sell you, but it's looking for ways to be a generous friend and then
Ooh, that's
building
the
that
bumper
relationship.
sticker. Like this, I want to just highlight what you said, looking for ways to be a generous friend without expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
There are so few people, I can count them on my fingers, that I would categorize as being a generous friend because I have met many people between podcast hosts and outside of that who are trying to invoke the law of reciprocity by giving with expectation.
Mhm.
And if you do that, you cancel out the law of reciprocity. It does not work. It's just
Yeah.
insane. So, gosh, this is cool. I hope do you have a handbook? Is this part of your book on, like, how
It is
to
yes, the follow-up process is
good.
entirely part of our book, and it's one of our 10 resources that we have when you get the book and that you can activate when you just go to the links inside the book. But yeah, so we have our guest podcasting process list. We have our 10, you can activate 10,000 podcast hosts, our list of 10,000 active podcasts that you may want to submit to using our strategy. We have emails and lists and suggestions for any way. So there's literally no excuse when you get the book to not put this into practice and to not have it work for you. Like
I sh
you
oh.
work the process, it'll work.
Oh, yeah. I need to have you come speak as a guest speaker on our podcast workshop. So we
Yes.
help people launch their podcast because we know how valuable it is. I need to have you come in and like either in person or virtually teach everyone how they should leverage their podcast and monetize it because we help people set up the back end and your CRM so it's working and all that. But the interpersonal communications you have mastered so well, and I just need to your book's gonna be in hardcover print, right?
Yes, it's gonna be paperback print for sure, and then we may do hardcover next year along with our audiobook will be coming out next year.
Okay, I need to buy a stack. Maybe you can, like, get me a box of them to
Yeah.
just hand out during the workshop because what you bring to the table, I don't wanna teach it because you already teach it so well. I can do what I do, but I want to bring yours to the table for everyone that's starting a podcast, and like, everyone needs to know what you're doing because 'cause you're so good at it.
Mhm. Thank you so much, and, like, guys, I just want you to know like, listen to that endorsement, like, I didn't pay Marianne to say that, and, like,
Nope.
that's the power of going on podcasts because suddenly you get a raving fan who's like, "I need to bring this to my mastermind," and that's one of the great ways that you can I give a case study example of one of the ways that I did that for my coaching company, breaking it down, just because of building that relationship. Podcast, business, it's all relational, but when you treat people like transactions, you get very little transaction actually.
That's the irony of it. Yeah. When you're a very transactional person, you're gonna end up disappointed most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanna go back in time way, way, way before. Let's go back before COVID. What made you what's the origin story of what made you take this? Because you have found in this business and it is very obvious. I don't think I've ever asked you this directly, but I don't even need to because I can pick it up. I can feel the energy. The Japanese have this term, the ikigai. I'm sure you heard of it, right?
Yeah.
You found it, and it's the place where what you do overlaps with what you love, overlaps with what people need in the world, and overlaps with what makes you money. But that didn't happen 4 years ago, and maybe it manifested 4 years ago, but the origin story happens well before that. What where did this come from?
I have always been a storyteller. Like ever since I was 5 years old, my mom like when we moved back from Australia and we're cleaning out my childhood home, I found all of these little videos of me moving little characters and putting them into place. And my mom came in and be like, Kim, what's happening? And I was like, there's a fire, and then this is happening, and there's always drama and escalation. And I mean, I grew up in the heart of Hollywood, so growing up in LA, the only career that I saw where I could make the income and the impact that I wanted to make was in cinema. And so that was my first passion, was becoming a screenwriter and an actor and a producer. I wanted to be the female Clint Eastwood. And
Mhm.
I never saw entrepreneurship as the path to creating that until later on in life, until my mid 20s, simply because what I saw from entrepreneurship, because I'm second generation entrepreneur, was struggle. Like, I saw my parents trying to grow their burgeoning tree business, but my dad was a highly functioning alcoholic and addict for
Oh,
30
wow.
years of my life. And so, and when I say highly functioning, I mean highly functioning. So that to the outward customer, he appeared incredibly friendly and gregarious. He was wonderful with customer relations and influence. But behind the scenes, when he was drinking, he was just not a kind person when the doors closed at home.
Mm.
And that was really challenging to see, and seeing I saw entrepreneurship and business as a struggle growing up, versus what I saw later on in life when my dad started making some very significant changes to his addiction, started seeking more help. And then later on, when I staged his intervention in 2016 and he got sober for the last 4 years of his life off of alcohol,
Oh.
their business doubled and tripled up until the last couple of years, making multiple millions. So that was really cool to see how stories can transform. And I got to see a business go from nothing, and I saw the struggle. And I remember one of my most proud moments was standing with my dad as we're looking at his yard with 15 trucks that they'd had, and they had a crew of, I think, about 20 people they were employing. And I was like, wow, dad. Like, and he was fine. He was finally sober. And he was like, I said, did you know that you were going to build this? He's like, Kimmy, for the first 10 years, I wish somebody had helped me. I wish I'd had a coach like you that could have guided me through, because he was borrowing his dad's pickup truck for the first 10 years. He wasn't asking for help. He was trying to do it all himself. And he was the DIY guy who was doing it all. And it wasn't until about 10 years in, when things started to shift, that he started hiring team and working with team and having a crew and stepping into a more leadership role. And then that's when things, because he was in that leadership limelight, he started to behave differently. And his addictions, he started to either hide better or try to stop them, actually. And so that was a really cool paradigm shift. So I grew up with that, simultaneously with this passion for storytelling. And because I grew up with two entrepreneurs, and as a second generation entrepreneur, my parents didn't think I was the crazy one, and fully supported me when I said I'm dropping out of college with two scholarships to pursue my career in Hollywood. And they're like,
Oh my gosh.
cool.
About time.
They're like, cool, we'll fully support you for the first, we'll take your college funds, use it for the first 2 years. And you get that, and that's what you get. And so I went and I networked and I hustled and I started to connect with people, and I ended up meeting my screenwriting partner and director for my first feature film, Bro. And that got produced, distributed, picked up by Lionsgate. Danny Trejo starred in it, and I had a dream to fill
Whew.
with 24. And I'm sitting there at the premiere going, why am I only 80% fulfilled?
Oh, girl. You got the red carpet and you're like, "This is
This is it?
great."
Yeah.
Ah.
And I saw the story, and it was what transpired after, because I had invited my cranial sacral therapist and her friend brought her son to the show. And my cranial sacral therapist said 2 weeks later, she goes, I want to let you know your movie changed that kid's life. And I was like, what? Because you see, my clients now, they see the trailer, they're like, wait, you co-wrote that? Like, did you only write the girls' parts? I'm like, no, I wrote the first draft, third
Right,
draft.
right.
But like, it's a paradigm shift for many people, because they see hardcore motocross movie and then me.
Yeah, yeah.
Very
That
different.
when that was a juxtaposition for me because I was like, "She is the crowned queen, and now she's writing about what?"
Yep.
That doesn't make
Yep.
any sense.
Very different. And so that was what really was the catalyst for me going into business. And when I realized that, even though I've been a screenwriter, my first business was at 19 years old, teaching Pilates to supplement and be able to support myself as a screenwriter. After the film got produced, I became the president of an e-commerce company selling a back stretching device that I got because of my Pilates background and my history with teaching that. And then from there, once I was bought out and had a successful exit from that company, I then started my coaching company. And I looked at this through line that for most people, they're like, this is very disconnected. And I'm like, it makes total sense to me because I've always been in the business of transforming people's stories. And that's
Mhm.
what podcasts are. It's giving you platforms to get on other people's platforms so that your story can be the catalyst of transformation. Because I've seen stories transform. I saw my dad's story transform from 50 years of addiction to the last 4 years of his life, he was sober. That's amazing.
That oh my gosh, that and there's so much wrapped up in that, and it's a wish that a lot of people have not only for their parents. Usually that starts first. I've noticed that in myself is that I wanted to be successful so that I could take care of my mom and dad,
Yeah.
and that it's gosh, it drives so much of what I do, even if they don't want it or accept it whenever I think they should or whatever. I wanted to be able to. But
Yeah.
as entrepreneurs, we also do that for other people's moms and dads and for other people's kids. And this fulfillment, this 80% that you're talking about blows past 100 when you see that. And
Mhm.
when you hear that, "You saved my kid's life." My husband did digital forensics for a long time, and he said the most fulfilling emails he got happened when, the attorneys would say, "Hey, you saved this kid's life," or you pulled someone out of a really dangerous situation because of what you were able to prove and so forth. And that is, I think, the most and altruism isn't even the right word anymore because I believe that word has been bastardized.
Mhm. I
But,
agree.
this sense of fulfillment in what we do. Yes, we deserve to make money doing it. That's why I don't really believe in friends and family discounts because I want to support the person who's doing the hustle. Let me pay full price, please.
Mhm.
But there's also this like, I believe it's what keeps a business going past year 5, give or take, is the owner's fulfillment in doing it, that even if they weren't getting paid, they would continue. At the same time, they do get paid. I go back to,
Mhm.
this theological part of it because I think a lot of Christians specifically, and we haven't talked a ton about faith, but that plays a huge part in what I do. I think a lot of Christians specifically have this weird flavor in their mouth about money. And I'm just like, listen, I think God wants us to be wealthy. I think he gives people who are assholes warnings because if you're an asshole and you're a millionaire, then you're just going to make asshole $1,000,000 decisions instead of asshole $10 decisions, right? So don't be an asshole. But he wants us to be wealthy and churches ask for
Mhm.
money. So we've got to get over this weird thing. Even Jesus's ministry was funded.
Mhm.
Like it just
Mhm.
ugh.
Yeah.
And again, it pisses me off so much because I used to live in a very scarcity mindset, and maybe there's part of me that I mean, I always have like growth to have there. But circling back, I want to turn to this word that's been rolling around my mind and maybe a little bit of vulnerability on my part because historically I have, and I know a lot of other people have committed the sin of comparison. And I think we hold back when
Mhm.
we are embarrassed by thinking, I should have arrived by now, or I should be at that milestone that this other person is at right now, and I'm not, and I don't want them to know because I might, erode a business possibility, or maybe they won't think
Mhm.
I'm cool enough to do business with, or whatever the embarrassment might be. Is this something that you've encountered or that you've encountered with your clients? Because I still feel it rear its ugly head sometimes. I'm like, oh, I'm not as far along as they are. Well, I guess they won't want to be my friend. It's
All the
ridiculous.
time. All the time. And I think the crazy thing is, like, it's not just for the good things that we chase, it's also for our own personal negative experiences. I've seen this a lot with people who've experienced trauma. I even write about this in the book, and it was on a podcast. And I'm going to be very transparent and vulnerable here for a minute. So I'm like, just getting your audience's permission that we're going to
I'm
go
leaning
there.
in. I'm leaning in.
Um, I was on a podcast, and it was the first time back in 2018 that I was sharing my story of sexual assault and rape, that I'd not shared ever. And I'd shared in places, but I'd fully healed. And I'd come to this space of such grace and this awareness of, wow, I put myself in such a dangerous position back then because of all of these beliefs that I had that I deserved to be punished, and all these beliefs that I had that were really a disservice and also rooted in some very deep-seated childhood beliefs and fear and challenges that I had with religion back when I was younger. And I went on this podcast and I shared about my story. And I shared that I also had to literally like I woke up one night as I processed this experience and I realized, oh my gosh, like I had to Google the definition of rape because
No
I did
kidding.
not believe that it had happened to me. And I was like, well, it wasn't bad enough. But
Uh-huh,
I
we
was
judge it.
Google yeah, because it wasn't the chase me down the dark hallway and try to strike this Hollywood movie scene. It was a very quiet scene where I had said no and he had not. And I had said no again and he still continued. And
Mm.
that was so rooted in shame for me for years. Years I didn't realize it was what it was. But I had the PTSD. I got nervous every time I went into the gym and was scared I was gonna see him or was embarrassed I'd see anybody who was at the party that night. Like, I had all the symptoms, but I didn't wanna diagnose it for what it was because it didn't match being bad enough.
Right,
And
the
I
box didn't
shared
fit.
what the box didn't fit, and I shared about this on the podcast, and the host goes, "Oh my god, I guess you could say that happened to me too."
No way.
And I was in another, a group of very highly successful businesswomen, and they had a trauma informed coach coming in and talking about childhood adverse experiences and all that. And one woman even admitted, she said, I don't like to share my story of what happened to me because I know there's other people that have had it worse. And I said, and that's the problem, because now you're judged. Now are so many women who have had it, just who are exactly where you're at, who aren't giving themselves permission to share that side of their story. Also, the same is true with their successes as well. One of our clients, when she hit her first six-figure year in her first year in business,
Shoot, girl.
she was struggling to share that because it wasn't her $1 million year. And I was
Right?
like, "Girlfriend, like we have to own that we're at where we're at and that our past has been our past. Your story doesn't have to be gooder or badder. It just has to be owned." And that's because there is somebody right now who is struggling exactly where you're at or exactly where you were at, that also isn't owning their experience. And by you owning yours, you're giving them permission to finally own and heal theirs.
I've noticed a big differentiator in people. And the people that feed this idea of embarrassment, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everybody will react the same way to my story. There will be people in our lives, either our bosses or our peers or whoever, maybe someone online, which people care less
Mhm,
about. We care more about the people that have close and proximity to us. But, well, let me just get specific. I had a specific experience where I was wanting to build a business. I wanted to build my own brand, and I was told verbally that it was encouraged, by my boss at the time. And then when I started, it was slammed, buried, and I got embarrassed for any small win that I had because um I wasn't supposed to be doing it even though they had
mhm.
no say in what I did off the clock, right? And, oh my gosh, working for somebody else is so difficult, like, ugh. It was crazy, and so I felt a level of what I thought was shame because if I violated, then I would lose my living, I would lose my job, and that was really scary for me. But then there's this whole other world of people that would freaking cheer me on because I created a logo, or cheer me on because I had my first, client, prospecting interview, or whatever the case may be. And I just have to say it, the people that are not cheering you on with mile 1 of your marathon, or maybe just signing up for the marathon in the first place, don't deserve to be in your life. And it's
Agreed.
gonna be very painful to get rid of them, but you have to.
And also the people who say that they'll be there, but they end up not showing up.
Girl.
'Cause
Oh.
there's a lot of people, and I see this more so with women than with men. unfortunately, and ladies, I think this is something we deeply have to heal with in our own sisterhood, is doing the people pleasing thing of saying that you're going to show up, saying that you're going to do something because it makes you look good, makes you feel good, makes the other person look good and feel good, but then not following through.
I've committed that sin, by the way, and I
Me
owe
too.
you a text message. I was just thinking
So
today, I'm like, I promised to introduce Kim to Hope, and I didn't yet, and it just hit my brain, because last time we podcasted, right after that, my brother went to the hospital, ended up passing away, and I dropped so many balls, and now I'm like, "Shoot, my integrity's on the line, and I have to pick up these pieces, and I can't even remember everything I promised to do." So, I
and
owe you a
that's
text message.
okay. That's that's 100% okay, and I even address grief in the book because, like, I fully feel that because I lost my dad in 2021, and I had a podcast interview scheduled, like, 2 weeks after, and I dropped the ball. I didn't even show up. Like, I
Oh.
missed time zones. I for some reason, I decided to schedule it myself because of, like, I don't know, old control patterns or whatever, but, like, grief makes you drop the ball, and I think that that's where we also need to give ourselves grace, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry that happened, Marianne." Like, that's
Oh, I
just fucked up.
appreciate that. It
Yeah,
was it was I mean, you can't plan and there's never a good time for those things, but,
no.
I what you're saying is absolutely true is, gosh, I used to be such a hardball with, showing up on time, and I still enjoy these perks of the rules by which I live my life, and I think that's really
Mhm.
the differentiator is I have the rules by which I live my life, but I can't condemn other people for rules that they never agreed to.
Yeah.
That being said, if you're gonna agree and have an understanding on something, I do expect the follow through. Or from again, my rule for me is if I
Mhm.
drop the ball, my rule for me is that I fix it because that's what allows me to trust my own decision making, right?
Yes. Or that you ask for a renegotiation of the agreement. Like,
Yeah,
because
that's
sometimes there may be something that you thought you could follow up with, and you can't actually complete that as part of, like, with your capacity of what you're handling, and that's where you just get to ask for permission from others is like, "Hey, I think we need to renegotiate our agreement." And that's
yeah.
okay. But that's when you come from that place of integrity versus the space of people pleasing, of saying the thing. Because I certainly don't think that you made any promises out of, like, the desire to people please. I think that it was actually fully in integrity, and then life started lifing and hard things happened, and
You know,
that's
I think sorry, I think it's so beautiful the way you embody and you live and even part of your brand, and I don't know if this was stemmed from the saying I'm about to share or not, but you live it so well, is that the sisterhood of women, we need to straighten out each other's crowns without telling the world that they were crooked.
yeah.
I love that that's part of who you are, and I want everyone that's listening to get a copy of your book. I'm gonna grab a copy. I'm gonna buy a box of them because I want people to understand this, and I don't know, maybe it's in the book, but maybe it's not. This principle of the ikigai of the podcasting world is one of the most beautiful ways to share what you love to do, to bless other people's lives in this altruistic way that you've demonstrated, and then also to make it sustainable so where it can support your family by doing so.
Mhm.
And that's amazing. I want everyone to find it. Tell me where people like so I can put it in the show notes and so everybody hears where can people find what you're doing, follow you, and get to be a part of your world. And if you have a resource for the people, let's make sure they know where to find it.
Yeah, so if you love this episode and you're like, "I want more leadership tools, more mindset shifts, more, learning how to just straighten out your own crown," listen to the Crown Yourself podcast and just go to crownyourself.com/podcast and pick your favorite podcast player from there. And then if you want to learn more specifically about how to profit from guest podcasting, communication strategies to really leverage your speaking, head on over to communicationqueens.com/podcast, subscribe to the Communication Queens podcast. And then if you are like, "Yes, queen, I want this book. I want the frameworks. I want the whole list of all the things," because I get neurotic and Virgo and, like, I get very detailed, but also very broad. Then, and I'm all about, like, really making sure that we give everybody a non-negotiable, no excuses toolkit so that you can learn how to do what I did, because I'm nothing special. Like, we are getting our clients booked on amazing podcasts, and they're seeing people ask like for them to come speak at their masterminds and form JV partnerships and getting referrals. So it's not just me. It's a it's a beautiful way to grow your business in the space of reciprocity and generosity, and to do it also in a fulfilling way. And so you can go to makeeverypodcastwantyou.com and get on the wait list for the book. It's coming out on September 30th. It will be available on Amazon in ebook and paperback on September 30th, which is International Podcast Day.
It is. Yes, perfect release date. You timed it so amazingly. Oh,
Yeah. So go and grab it and get on the wait list and join us if you want for our book launch podcast party that we're having with a pitchathon. So you can come meet some podcasters and get booked.
okay. So, guys, follow through with that. I want you to get on stages. I want you to know, love, and just experience everything that Kim has to offer. She's an incredible person. I only have my favorite people on the show. So, I want you to be part of her world. And Kimberly, like, I hope in my fantasy of imagination, there's like you and me and Hope Zavara and a bunch of other ladies going on a cruise together. And we're just like creating ideas and talking about how to bless the world and grow businesses.
Done.
Someday this has got to happen.
Done. Give me the date and I will put it in the calendar.
Hell yeah.
Like
Let's go. Let's go. Well, I freaking love you, girl. Thank you for being on the show, friends. I'll put everything in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, maybe in your car or wherever, go to the YouTube channel, click on the description. You'll be able to find everything that Kim has released. Get a copy of her book. Like, just be a part of this because your message deserves to be heard. And we will see you on the next episode of the Marianne Hickman Show. Hey, what's up? Marianne Hickman here. Hey, listen, I hope you enjoyed that episode. We have some pretty amazing speakers on my podcast, and of course, more to come. If this is something that you enjoyed, guys, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. You guys know what to do. I love your comments and I respond to every single one of them personally, not a bot or an agency. So if this is something you're enjoying, tell me about it. Tell me your gold nuggets. I want to hear from you. But here's the most important thing I want you to laser in on. I told you about the podcast database. You've probably seen me post about it all over social media. I want to make sure that you get it. So here's what I want you to do. Go to mariannehickman.com/database. Once you put all of your information in there, I'm going to send you the document. You request access to it. Boom, it's unlocked. Once you're in there, my rule of thumb is to apply to 10 podcasts a month. It's very digestible. It's very easy to do. And the database gets updated twice a week. So I want you constantly checking back in there for the next podcast that fits your audience. Thank you for being here. Much love to you, and we'll see you in the next episode.